Hi, welcome to Off the Page. I'm Leslie Choice, and my guest this week is Jean Dohany, Newfoundland novelist, now living in New Brunswick. Welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, that's good to have you. Now, you've written a trilogy about women in Newfoundland outports. How does that happen that you write 3 books instead of 1?
Oh, a fluke. It would be nice if I could say it had been all organized and thought out, and I thought this would be a great dramatic work to undertake. But in actual fact, what happened was I was going to write a book about the middle woman, which there's Bertha, the mother, Carmel, the daughter, and then there's Tess, the granddaughter. And the reason I wanted to write about Carmel was that it was during World War II when she would have been in her 20s, and I wanted to show what had happened to this little village I lived in as a result of 2 bases, American bases, being surrounding it, where everyone went to work, and there was influx of the American servicemen. And it had quite a sociological impact on our little village, and no one seemed to be aware of this, or if they were aware, they weren't talking about it. It wasn't down in books. And I thought, what a better way to show what has happened, or what a force it is to have people, a whole community of people come in on another smaller insular community, and the changes that occurred. And some of them were not really good changes. They were very negative changes. And
the characters took on a bit of life of their own after that, once you got this village going, once
yes.
the characters were out there.
But once I got Carmel underway, then in order to get her really fleshed out, I had to find out who her mother was. Every time I do something, I wonder, who is this person? And in order to find out who this person is, I go back.
So you went backwards instead of forwards at that point?
Yes, and I went backwards to see who Bertha was. And Bertha became such a strong woman, such a forceful woman, and so worthy of her own story that she came first, and I wrote she started off with the Corrigan women, and really it started off with Bertha. And then I went in to Carmel, the daughter. And then people kept saying, and Tess, of course, was the daughter of Carmel. And she's
the main character in the new book.
And she's the main character, and people kept saying, we want to know about Tess, we want more of Tess. And I used to say, no, I'm tired of the Corrigan women. I'm moving on. But one day I went down to my mailbox. I was still teaching at UMB at the time, and this it was a card from a student, and she said, I want more of Tess.
Demanded it.
Yes. So that's how I wrote Tess, and this is how this really came into being.
Now, the title of this volume, A Fit Month for Dying, is rather ominous. Where does that come from?
Well, there's a lot of death in this, but it's not really morose and morbid, although I'm sure death is always, to a degree, morbid. But the Fit Month for Dying came in because Tess's husband said to her, when his mother died at Christmas time, and at Christmas time it meant that you had to haul the casket in the front door and the Christmas tree out the back door, and forever after Christmas would be tainted by that their mother had died at that point. So, and also where she was being buried, the earth was frozen, and you'd have to blast the grave, and it was a big storm and a snowstorm, and they couldn't a hard time getting out to the village where she was being buried. And he said, December is not a fit month for dying. To which Tess replies, what month is? And that's where the title A Fit Month for Dying came.
Now, the grandmother at the beginning is quite an interesting character, and she says something to the effect that growing up in Newfoundland, it will break your heart. Where does that come from, that concept?
Because life was so hard. Life was, And they were prepared to have their lives broken.
It was expected.
Yes, and yes, it was expected. And for the most part, your children grew up and went to the States. And you never heard from them again.
Is there an overriding sense of loss that people feel as a result of
Definitely loss, and it's not so now. But at this point, when this story was being written for Bertha, for sure, all the people went away to the States, and they never returned. Some didn't even write because a stamp cost 4 cents, and they didn't have 4 cents to get a stamp. So they lost contact. It was just like when you went away, you were as good as dead. It was another morning, you know.
Now, Tess Corrigan here, she's a female member of the Newfoundland House of Assembly.
Yes.
What would that be like?
Well, I wanted to make her. I don't know what it would be like because I haven't had the experience. But I wanted Tess to be a woman of her times, and I do not admire women who get the vapors sort of thing.
What does that mean?
Well, in 18th century England, women would get the vapors and they would fall on the fainting couch and but it was because their corsets were too tight. But I didn't want
right,
her.
You couldn't suck enough oxygen into your lungs.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I didn't want her to be a porcelain doll type of woman. I like strong, working women who can, handle their own share of things. So I thought, what better place to put her than in a position that she can become premier of the province and move on and someday become prime minister.
Now, is the House of Assembly is still this raucous place that I envision that mostly men shouting at each other, hurling insults.
Yes, and now I haven't heard lately since, let's say, Tobin was taken over in the last few years. But yes, I remember it as very entertaining.
Quite an
very
entertaining, dramatic
yes,
place.
yes.
Now, Tess's son in the book has been abused by a priest. This is a kind of story that we've heard of Newfoundland that's become very much part of Newfoundland culture. How does she deal with it?
Well, to Tess it was a terrible blow over and above the fact that it was her son that was abused. Of course, she blames herself for the allowing the abuse to have ever happened because she thinks she was less than a mother not to have noticed there was something wrong.
And she encouraged her son to go to these various
and
events.
And she encouraged, because she was in love, when she was a teenager, she was in love with a young man who went away, spurned her for the priesthood, so to speak. And so this priest that's in there now in her son's life reminds her of this young man. He's idealistic. He has everything going for him that she envisioned this Dennis had. And so she doesn't look the other way, but it never occurs to her that there may be a problem. And so she's affected on many levels by this abuse. Guilt is a big one.
And often in your stories you write about people that have secrets or secrets that exist in community and that sort of thing.
I love secrets because I think we all have secrets. I think that's what makes the world go round. Our secret comes out and it unfolds, and it's not as terrible as we thought it was. But I think all families have a way of having bringing a barrier around themselves and keeping what's in and not letting others in on it. And actually what's in is not that terrible, but people don't want to expose all of themselves to the outside world.
That's right, but ultimately they need to open up. Maybe you would be good enough to read us an excerpt from your book there?
Well, certainly. Well, I'll choose from chapter 5, and in this part, Tess has always been aware that she resulted from a bigamous marriage, and this has been one of her crosses to bear. And so she's now decided to look for him and has located him down in Arizona.
This is the father.
This is the
her
father.
real father.
She's found him down there, and she's going to meet him with him. She didn't want to meet with him. She has no love for him. He's an American serviceman who came to the base in Argentina, married her mother, not bigotedly married her mother, and then left when the marriage got annulled, and so she has never seen him. And she's only known him as a man in a photograph. When she was 7 or 8 years old, she found a photograph in her mother's bureau drawer, and she knew instinctively that was her father. Yes. So that's all she's ever known of this man, and he was very debonair, and of course he was quite a young man at that point.
Okay,
and
so here she is, Tess Corrigan.
All right, here she is. Yep. My plane lands at the Phoenix airport in the late afternoon, and I take the shuttle bus to Scottsdale. All during the ride, I fret about the moment when I will first set eyes on Ed Strominski. Like the 3 holy women on their way to anoint Jesus in the tomb, worried over what they would see when they rolled back the stone. I worry about what I will see when Ed Strominski pulls open his door. And I worry about what I will say to him, for that matter, about what he will say to me. I wonder whether he will be the one to speak first. And if so, will he say, "Hello, I'm your father"? If I speak first, will I say, "Hello, I'm Tess, your daughter"? Or will I say instead, "Hello, I'm Tess Corrigan"? Will we shake hands? If he extends his hand, can I bear to have his flesh touch mine, even in such a cursory manner? I get out of the shuttle bus at the entrance to the gated complex, and as I walk up the flagstone path to his building, my travel case slung over my shoulder, I can hear my heart beating deep inside my ears, beating as if it is going to burst out through my breastbone. When I press my hand against my chest to try and slow it down, I leave a sweaty, wet stain on my blouse pocket. Because I'm not accustomed to such heat, or maybe because I am nervously gulping air and taking in too much oxygen, I begin to feel lightheaded. The flagstones on the path start to heave and swell as if I am out on the mid-Atlantic, and I have to cup both hands over my mouth and breathe into them to regain my equilibrium. Ed Strominski's apartment is on the 2nd floor of the 2-story building. A handwritten sign on his door says, "No solicitors." I read the sign, recheck the number on the door, swipe my sweaty hands across the thighs of my cotton slacks, and snag one more mouthful of air before I press the bell. A great deal of time seems to pass without a response, and I am just about to recheck the door number again when it is pulled open by a stooped, pale-fleshed, sunken-jawed old man in beige cotton pants and a white shirt buttoned to the neck. The pants hang slackly on his hips, and his shirt is buttoned crookedly, so that one side jibs upward towards his chin. There is a wide gulch between his neck and the collar of his shirt. Over the years, I've fantasized many meetings with Ed Strominski, but in all of those meetings, I never took into account the intervening years. The man I always met was the jaunty construction worker of the black and white snapshot, the man who could bulldoze a Navy base out of windswept rock, the handsome scoundrel who could flim-flam Carmel with romantic postcards, evening in Paris perfume, and a disarming roguish smile. At the sight of the threadbare old man standing in the doorway, I am so certain I have rung the wrong doorbell that I am about to excuse my intrusion when he says, "Tess, you must be Tess Corrigan."
That's Jean Dohany reading from A Fit Month for Dying. Thank you for that. The grandmother, again, in the book speaks at one place, and there was a line that I became fascinated with. She says, "Laugh before dawn, weep before dark." What does that mean?
Because don't get too cocky about your happiness. It's short-lived, and so you get up in the morning, be prepared for what's going to happen down the line. Don't get too swayed by your things that are going all right now. And I guess it came from the fact that they did live in a very isolated place. They did depend upon the sea for their living. And when you depend upon the sea for your living, you know hardship. And you know that when you get up at dawn, you may be laughing, but by the time nightfall, there may be a dory overturned, and there's a death or two in your family. So I think that's what she always was preparing her for.
Would these be phrases you'd hear in a family setting kind of over and over? The grandmother or someone in your story or someone else's would just come back and always have that there
used,
waiting.
yes, over and over again, they used the same, I don't know what you would call them, I suppose, things to, you know, set you right, or things
Explain
to
the way the world works.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And the other thing would be God will provide, you know. That.
Of course, yeah. My guest is Jean Dohany. We're going to take a short break and be right back. Welcome back to Off the Page. My guest today is Newfoundland novelist Jean Dohany. Jean, in 1989, you wrote a book that was not fiction. It was a journal called When Things Get Back to Normal, and it was your journal about the days of your life, the first year after the death of your husband. Why did you write that book?
Well, you asked in the beginning, why did I write the trilogy, and I said it was a fluke. Well, this too was never meant to be a published book. I had kept a journal as the only way I could deal with the sudden death and the upheaval in my life that had taken place. And then one day, someone who was doing a piece for CBC asked if on grief, asked if I would read, and I hesitantly did so. And then after that, the studio lit up with lights and whatnot, everybody wanting the book. So the magnitude of the grief out there, it just astounded me. And so then someone said I should publish it. And then, lo and behold, I sent it off to Pottersfield Press. And I always remember what you said. You said, I rarely take a book so swiftly, but this one intrigues me greatly. And you said, it will be a sleeper. And I didn't, at that point, I had no idea what a sleeper meant in terms of a piece of work, writing. And true enough, it has been a sleeper. You know.
It seems to be the kind of thing that, that people do learn from and share with you, that grief experience. It's not a how-to book. It documents what you had to write each day as you learn to cope with the death of your husband.
It just documents by day to day the significant parts. I mean, there was a lot that went on in your day that weren't significant enough to put down on paper, but some things that got into your heart or got into your soul, or and that I had to express them. Mm-hmm. And I didn't want to burden my friends with them, and because I needed them to get away from myself every so often. If all I did was talk about, oh, nobody knows the trouble I've seen, you know, mm-hmm. They wouldn't want to be around me for very long. So that's what I put down. There were really soul moments. And I think that's what people relate to, because, you know, we're not different from one from another, and we all react to grief. But when people saw it in writing, they thought, oh, it's okay. I felt that way, but I thought I was. Did
you get responses from
the
readers?
Mm-hmm. Lot of responses from people quite far away. I even had a response from someone in Wisconsin. I have no idea how the book found its way down there. But everybody had a death in the family, yes. Not necessarily a husband, but they were grieving. Some people wrote and said they had, as a result of a divorce, which is another type of death.
But they related to your story?
They related, yes. Mm-hmm. And they were able to say they went through the same passages of grief. You know, I had.
What are those stages of?
Well, now,
of
see,
healing,
I don't believe in really in stages. I had read a book that said, now you're here, now you're there, and you're in denial, and then you're in anger, and you're in acceptance, and you go on and on. I didn't. Of course, I didn't analyze where I am, but even in hindsight, I don't think you work in that kind of a structured fashion. I think today you might be in denial, but by the end of the day, something whomps you that you're no longer in denial. You come out of it, and you're furious, you're angry, and
it's more mixed
it's just
together.
A mix. I think
yes.
all of the emotions that they say are in the stages happen to you, but I don't think they're just categorized in lockstep yes. fashion, you know.
And here's a book, soon to be back in print. You were born in Point Verde, Placentia Bay. I don't know if I have that pronounced right.
No, you didn't pronounce it
no, of
correctly.
Course not.
Point Verde.
Yes.
Yeah. Placentia.
What was that like, growing up there? Can you give me a little vignette, a little picture of some time when you were a young girl?
It's probably had 35, 40 houses clustered around a pond with a backdrop of cliffs, and most of the houses were, you know, eyeballing the Atlantic Ocean. So that would be Point Verde. The paint was licked, or the lime was licked off all the palings, and because from the Atlantic Ocean.
The salt air and the wind.
Yes. So that was it. Was yeah. I suppose I went back after being away for quite a while, and I thought, oh, it's so ramshackle, and I hadn't noticed it as being ramshackle, and maybe it wasn't then. People have moved off to Alberta now, and they've left houses empty, and the fences are all gap-toothed. You know, the palings around the houses are gap-toothed, and they look so sad. And I think it's because the people went down the road to find work after the American bases, fishing stopped. American bases came then with the war, and then that petered out, and now the people have gone down the road.
What took you away?
I went to Gander, that's what took me away. Well, it wasn't very far away, but at that point there was no road through through Newfoundland. So when I went to Gander, I went on the train, and I went for a year, even though it was probably about 3 hours away from my home or something, you know. But I had to go that long because transportation was such. Now the road is through. And I had a choice of going to work on the base, and I had heard my father complaining so much about the base.
It was the American
base.
Yeah.
But everything was the base. You either went back and forth, which is a strange phenomenon that happened to people, or you stayed down. And if you went back and forth, you wore yourself out. Now back then, you know, I mean, you went. They said, or some people went up and down. Then when you said, "What are you doing this year?" "Oh, I'm going up and down." Nobody seemed to think that was a strange thing to be doing, going up and down or going back and forth. You never asked going up and down where or going back and forth where.
Always to the base.
Always
where
to the base.
Work was.
Yeah, going up and down or going back and forth was to the base, and they all complained about it because they had to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and didn't get home till 7. So for that reason, and my brother was in Gander. I went to Gander, and that's where I met my husband. And then he went back to university in New Brunswick, and that's how, hence I went.
Took you away.
Yes.
And your first novel wasn't published until 1988, I think. That's right. That's a long time of a writing career to develop before the publication of a book.
Oh, well, I wasn't writing. I was teaching in the school system in New Brunswick for a while, and then I was teaching at university. And it wasn't until, I really didn't start writing until my brother met an untimely death down in Mexico. And he had always encouraged me to write because he said I had the ability to write. We wrote small things back and forth together. And so as a tribute to him, I thought, oh, well, maybe I will write a story or a novel. And at the same time, I went down to Boston to do my doctorate. And as a part of the doctorate, I had to take a course in creative writing. And I wrote part of the novel there, and the professor said, "What are you doing here taking education courses? Why aren't you home writing?" So
you took the advice?
I took the advice.
That's excellent, and we're very happy that you did. We're going to take a short break and be right back after this. Watching Off the Page today, my guest is Jean Dohany. Jean, where did the voices come from in your fiction?
Oh, they come from many people with whom I associated, grew up with. They are not one person, but just from the village.
From back to Newfoundland on the coast.
Yes.
Thanks very much for coming on the show.
Appreciate your having me, Leslie.
My guest was Jean Dohany, and I'm Leslie Choice. I'll see you again next time on Off the Page.